In today's video, we're looking at some of the very rare tier magic items, which are some of the hardest to find items in the game right under legendary and artifact items, and ranking some of the worst ones that are either too weak to be considered very rare magic items, or outright useless. And starting us off at number 10, we have the Spear Backbiting, which was introduced in the Tales from the Yawning Portal adventure book. This is one of the first of few cursed items that will be appearing on this list. Usually, cursed items come with drawbacks for players while bestowing them with unique benefits to tempt the player to even use the item to begin with. In this instance, the Spear Backbiting is a +2 magic weapon that is meant for throwing rather than attacking. This is because the spear gains an additional hit dice whenever it's thrown, making its base damage 2d6 +2, while also gaining an increasing throw range of 50-90 rather than 20-60. And once you hit or miss with the weapon whenever you throw it, the spear flies back to your hand immediately ready to be used again. This is a fantastic way to give your players a reusable thrown item, as it deals more damage than pretty much any other thrown item in the game, since it's basically like throwing a +2 greatsword at enemies. However, as this is a cursed item, we do have to weigh the benefits of this item over the drawbacks that come with it. While you're attuned to the Spear Backbiting, you gain an unwillingness to part with the weapon, and will always keep the weapon within reach at all times until you remove or break the curse with the Remove Curse or something similar so that you can unattune to it. You also have disadvantage on any attack rolls you make with weapons that aren't this spear. But the most debilitating part of this curse is what happens whenever you critically fail your attack rolls made with this weapon. When this happens, the spear bends or flies and attempts to hit you in the back, which forces you to make an additional attack roll against your own AC, dealing damage as if you had made the attack. So, the price you pay for a pretty strong throwing weapon is being forced to use that weapon at all times with a 5% chance for the weapon to backfire and try to hit you. In terms of curses, this isn't terrible, especially if you manage to have a way to give yourself advantage on your attack rolls with this weapon to minimize the backfire chance, such as with a Samurai Fighter's Fighting Spirit subclass feature, granting them advantage on all attack rolls for the turn. You might also have a way of gaining resistance to piercing damage, such as through the Barbarian Rages feature, if you're choosing to swing it over and over, since your rage bonus and reckless attacks don't actually affect the spear whenever you throw it. Coincidentally enough, you can also circumvent having disadvantage on all attack rolls when using other weapons while attuned to the spear by using reckless attack and give yourself advantage, which cancels out both and changes the attack roll into a normal one. So if you want to use the spear at long range and the greatsword for enemies that are too close to make a ranged attack against, you can actually do both without suffering the negative downsides of having disadvantage on any of your rolls. And if you don't mind using this spear all the time, you can always take the Crossbow Expert feat, which allows you to make ranged attacks without suffering disadvantage by having hostile creatures within 5 feet of you. So, while the downsides of this magic item are definitely harmful, there are easy enough ways around these negative aspects of the spear that it only takes number 10 spot on this list. And at number 9, we have all the Dragon Scale Mail variants from the Dungeons Master's Guide. These sets of armor require attunement and come in a variety of colors which correspond to the type of dragon they're related to, granting the wearer a +1 bonus to their AC and advantage on saving throws against a dragon's frightful presence and breath weapons. However, every variant of this armor also contains 2 key differences that distinguish them from one another. The first is differences in regards to the resistance each set of armor provides, while also corresponding with the color of the dragon that made up the armor. So, a set of black Dragon Scale Mail would grant you resistance to acid damage, a set of red Dragon Scale Mail would grant you resistance to fire damage, etc, etc. The other key difference is that each variant of Dragon Scale Mail grants you special abilities that you can use once per day to discern the distance and direction of the closest dragon within 30 miles of you, with the color matching whatever variant of the armor you're currently wearing at the time. So, what's wrong with this item? Well, for starters, it's a +1 AC on a set of very rare Scale Mail, which is not very good, considering Scale Mail in general is only the second best set of medium armor in the game, right under Half-Blade armor. And by the time your campaign gains access to very rare magic items, you already have access to +2 armor. Usually, whenever a set of armor has less of an AC bonus than the normal enchanted armor of that tier, there's often effects that mitigate and balance out the loss of that bonus. You could argue that the damage type resistance you gain for wearing this armor might be more than enough to circumvent the lower AC bonus of the armor, which is fair when you consider that you also have some protection against a dragon's frightful presence and breath weapon, arguably their 2 deadliest weapons in their arsenal. However, unless your campaign allows for multiple dragon encounters rather than the occasional dragon encounter, you're not going to make that much use of the protection or the ability to sense a dragon within 30 miles of you. As for the damage resistance, there's already armor and rings that you can attune to that give you resistance to specific damage type that are only considered rare quality, but this can be a good way to give yourself resistance to 2 damage types at once. Overall, the Dragon Scale Mail is okay at best, and a straight downgrade at worst, as it mostly functions as a +1 scale mail with resistance to a single damage type. But the worst part about this magic item is the fact that it does require you to have access to dragon scales, which you can obtain from either a slain dragon or as a gift from a dragon, meaning that you would most likely have to encounter at least one dragon before you're able to craft this armor if one isn't available by other means, such as a very rare magic item trader or something. It also doesn't help that each new source book that comes out introduces more types of armor that just power creeps the dragon scale mail by giving the wearer the ability to do things that are generally more useful. Gloomrot armor, which was introduced in the Book of Many Things, is a set of armor which grants you 3 charges of the Calm Emotion spell that recharges at a rate of 1d3 every dawn, and permanent advantage on saving throws to avoid and end the effects of being frightened so long as you're wearing it, and is only considered to be of rare quality. Meanwhile, anti-magic armor, introduced in the same sourcebook, allows the wearer to give themselves advantage on a single saving throw against a spell once per dawn, while flat out giving you the ability to also cast the anti-magic field spell, requiring no spell components once per dawn, which is a very powerful 8th level spell which shuts off all magical effects, including from spells and magical items, while within the spell's radius. So, while the Dragon Scale Mail and its variants might not be that great compared to other types of magical armor in the game, the reason it only takes number 9 on this list is because it's a specialized armor that's meant for fighting one particular type of enemy with, and at least has some general use via its damage type protection. And at number 8, we have the Stonemaker War Pick. This is a weapon which requires attunement and was introduced in the Book of Many Things. While attuned to it, you gain a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls with it, and comes with 2 properties. The first property allows you to cast the Meld into Stone spell once per dawn, while the other property gives the War Pick a chance to petrified weakened enemies. The way this works is, the War Pick has 1d6 plus 1 charges that you can spend 1 at a time whenever you score a critical hit on a creature that has fewer than 100 hit points if they fail a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, petrifying them for 8 hours. There's no way to regain any of those charges, so once you've used them, they're gone for good. This is basically a worse version of Power Word Kill that requires you to fulfill a lot of conditions before you can actually pull off a petrification. Except in this instance, petrifying a creature doesn't actually kill it, just takes it out of the combat. But because of how inconsistent this effect is, you really don't want to try and fish for a critical hit against an enemy you might want to imprison or keep alive. There are much easier and reliable ways to do so, and if you want to take someone out of combat, then you're better off letting your spellcasters take care of that with a simple hold person or hypnotic pattern spell. 2 out of many excellent crowd control options. But the worst part about this magic item is its +1 bonus to attack rolls and damage. Unlike armor, very rare weapons can actually have a +3 bonus rather than +2, meaning that the effects of this weapon should be a lot stronger than it actually is. Meld into Stone also isn't that great of a spell under normal circumstances, so there's a very good chance that this property goes fairly unused in comparison to most other weapons of this tier. And to make matters worse, this magic item is actually power crept by an already existing weapon in the DMG, the 9 Live Stealer. This weapon is a +2 with 1d8 plus 1 charges and has the exact same effect as a Storm War Pick, except it instantly kills instead of petrifies and only expends a charge if the creature is slain. While both of these magic weapons aren't amazing, if I had to choose between the Stone War Pick and the 9 Live Stealer, the 9 Live Stealer would win every time since 9 times out of 10, you're already going into combat with the intent to kill. While the Stone War Pick can technically take out enemies non-lethally, its drawbacks and lack of consistency are just too much of a downgrade to make the petrification feature worth taking up one of your 3 attunement slots. What keeps this item from being any higher on this list, however, is the fact that, unlike some of the other entries on this list, it does have some general use that you might get out of it with its Meld into Stone property, as well as the ability to take something out of combat when or if the petrification decides to work. And at number 7, we have the Forcebreaker Weapons. This is one of the new magic items introduced in the Book of Many Things, and can only be crafted on weapons that deal bludgeoning damage. As for what it does, it grants a +2 bonus to attack and damage rolls made with weapon, and comes with the additional benefit of allowing the wielder to instantly destroy structures of force, such as those created by Force Cage or Wall of Force spells. If the structure is large or smaller, then the magical force completely shatters, while huge or larger structures will only have 20 cubic feet of it destroyed. There's not really much to say about this weapon other than it's an incredibly niche tool to have, as it would only really function in times where you might be encountering a lot of magical barriers, such as traversing an evil wizard's magical tower, since spells like Force Cage and Wall of Force aren't typically used very often against players. When it does come up, however, the Forcebreaker is amazing. Fortunately, this item has 2 saving graces that keep it from being any lower on this list. The first is the fact that it's a +2 weapon, meaning you're not losing much when it comes to the bonuses it has in comparison to a normal +3 weapon of the same tier. The second saving grace is the fact that it does not require you to attune to the weapon in order to make use of it. allowing you to pocket the weapon until you need it while you have a +3 greatsword. And since one of the weapons you can have Forcebreaker on is Sling, you can also give this to one of your backline party members on the off chance they need to break someone out of a force cage from range. So while this weapon might not much have going for it, the fact that you can just pocket it until it's needed does give the Forcebreaker weapon a tiny bit of flexibility when compared to other magic items on this list. And at number 6, we have the Sword of Sharpness. This very rare sword comes with the Dungeon Master's Guide and does quite a few things. Firstly, whenever you hit an object with the sword, it always deals the max amount of damage. Secondly, it allows you to speak a command word of the sword, causing it to shed bright light in a 10-foot radius, while shedding an additional 10 feet of dim light outside of that, and you can speak the word again or sheath the sword to put it out. But the most important thing about the Sword of Sharpness is its ability to deal an extra flat 17 slashing damage and chop off limbs whenever you roll a natural 20 for either effect. Dealing an additional 14 extra damage flat, regardless of whatever blade this effect is put on, is an excellent effect to have. But the fact that you have to roll a natural 20 is what makes this weapon kind of niche, similar to how you need to critically hit with the Stone War Pick in order to activate its petrification effect. And even if you do, unlike the Stone War Pick, where the enemy has to make a saving throw, you have to roll another natural 20 in order to activate the effect that slices off the creature's limb. Statistically speaking, you only have a 1 in 400 chance to actually pull off both effects at once, which is not favorable. And while not necessarily the biggest deal, the wording on this magic item implies that it only works whenever you roll a nat 20, and not whenever you just score a critical hit, meaning you can't really cheese the effects with class features like the Champion Fighter's improved critical subclass feature. The only saving grace this weapon has is the fact that dealing an extra 14 slashing damage on his own is infinitely better and more consistent than rolling an additional damage dice whenever you land a crit. And if this weapon had any bonuses to attack and damage rolls, this wouldn't be so bad. But because it applies to +0 weapons by default, the overall usefulness of the Sword of Sharpness just kind of makes it a bit inconsistent and inaccurate to use when compared to much better items as a rarity, so it takes number 6 on this list. And at number 5, we have Demon Armor. This is a set of +1 plate armor that comes from the Dungeon Master's Guide and is another cursed item. It grants you the ability to speak Abyssal and comes with a set of clawed gauntlets that turn your unarmed strikes into magical weapons that deal slashing damage with a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls, while also providing your unarmed strikes a damage die of 1d8. The drawback of this armor? You have disadvantage on attack rolls against demons, and you're more susceptible to their spells and special abilities by having disadvantage against them. And if you think you can just take off the armor before heading off into a demon field hunt, you'd be wrong because the curse also prevents you from taking off this armor in the first place, unless someone uses something like a remove curse spell in order to suppress the curse long enough for you to take it off. On the surface, being able to make such strong unarmed strikes on a character that normally doesn't get them, like monks, sounds pretty neat. However, the biggest problem with demon armor isn't so much the stats or the curse itself, rather the utility of this armor. Plate armor is heavy armor that only a few classes can be proficient in, and the classes that are proficient in heavy armor can already use weapons that deal much better damage. Paladins and fighters are the main two classes that start with heavy armor proficiency, and can very easily use a +3 greatsword which deals 2d6 damage over the demon armor's 1d8 damage that it does, which is much less preferable. So in most cases, donning the demon armor can be seen as an active downgrade over what you can already get with non-magical weapons. Overall, the demon armor is pretty terrible as a set of +1 plate armor, since you'd have +2 armor and +3 weapons available by the time very rare items start becoming available, neither of which require you to attune to them. And even if you were to find some way for a monk to wear heavy armor for some bizarre reason, there's a pretty good chance that your monk's martial art die will already be 1d8, as levels 10 to 15 in the typical range for the rare items to start making an appearance. So whatever way you look at it, the demon armor is a terrible item with terrible stats that also has a debilitating curse that makes you worse at fighting and defending against demons, making it not even worth taking as the negative effects far outweigh the benefits you would get otherwise. And it's only really at number 5 on this list because there are even more items to cover that are just worse than a set of demon armor. And at number 4, we have Arcane Propulsion Arm, which originates from the Eberron Rising from the Last War sourcebook. What it does is allow a creature with a missing hand or arm to attune to it and gain a fully functional replacement limb, as it magically forms a perfect copy of whatever hand or arm you're replacing. You can also use your action to detach the arm for whatever reason, and will also remove itself whenever you unattune from it. But the best thing the Arcane Propulsion Arm does is it gives you a rocket punch-like ability with a range of 20-60 if you throw the arm, which causes the prosthetic to detach itself and fly at the target of the attack before immediately returning and reattaching itself back to you. The damage this deals, regardless of whether or not you're using it normally as a punching option or as a rocket punch, is 1d8 force damage on hit and also counts as a magical melee weapon. While there aren't any downsides to using this magic item, the only worthwhile benefit of this item is the 1d8 force damage, which isn't even that great since most weapons can already deal 1d8 damage by this point. However, because this damage is force, most creatures in the game won't be able to resist it, which is still a plus. But since this counts as a magical melee weapon, it doesn't qualify as a monk weapon, meaning you can't use some of your key points with it. And since it doesn't count as a simpler martial weapon, you also can't make the arm a monk weapon via the dedicated weapon monk feature introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which gave classes a whole bunch of optional features like the one mentioned. Overall, this is more of a fun weapon rather than a good one. 1d8 damage without any other bonuses is kinda weak for something that's supposed to count as a very rare magic item, which normally would have a +3 bonus by default. But the reason this item takes number 4 in this list and not any higher is because of 2 factors. The first of which, its force damage, we've already covered. The second thing is the fact that because, for all intents and purposes, the Arcane Propulsion Arm is attached to your own body, meaning you can basically count this as a weapon that you can sneak into places that you normally wouldn't be able to by passing off the arm as a mundane prosthetic. So while this magic armor is just a fancy common item that you can already get, there are some niche situations where having a rocket punching arm can be useful, not to mention how cool it is to have. And at number 3, we have the Bracelet of Rock Magic. This is a magical gold bracelet introduced in Tales of the Yawning Portal and is yet another cursed item. While wearing the bracelet, you gain immunity to the petrified condition while also allowing you to cast the Flesh to Stone spell 3 times as an action. The spell used in this way has a DC 15 Constitution saving throw against whatever creature you're using it on. On a failed save, the creature becomes restrained and now has to effectively make death saving throws by saving against the spell 3 times. Where the effect will instantly end. However, if the creature fails the saving throw 3 times, they become petrified for the duration of the spell, or until the effect is cured if you manage to concentrate on the spell for the entire duration of 1 minute. Once you've used the spell 3 times, you can no longer cast it, but can now instead cast Stone Shape 13 times as an action, which is not as good, but can still be useful for shaping stones into idols or improvised weapons or something, whereafter the bracelet will become inert and the gold turns into lead. Free spells are always nice whenever it comes to magic items. However, since you can't choose which of the 2 spells you can cast and must use Flesh to Stone before you can use Stone Shape, this kind of limits what you can use the bracelet for at any time. And while 3 chances to turn a creature into stone is nice, by the time you gain access to this magic item, most creatures will have high enough constitution that they can very easily beat a DC 15 Constitution saving throw with no problems. But what about the curse this weapon has? Does it make worth taking this item? In a way, it does, since it doesn't directly affect the creature that's wearing it. To explain, the bracelet doesn't like it when you try to petrify creatures that have a strong relationship to earth and stone, such as stone giants and dwarves, using the bracelet to cast Flesh to Stone. Doing so causes 3 things to happen. First, the dwarves make their saving throw against the spell with advantage. The second thing happens whenever such a creature successfully saves against the spell, which is your attunement with the bracelet instantly breaks and tries to cast the spell on you, which you make at disadvantage. The final thing that happens if you fail your saving throw against the spell, that's it. You're petrified instantly instead of having the chance to make the saving throw at the end of your turns. And if there's no immediate way to cure yourself of petrification, then that's basically instant death in a lot of cases. In short, as long as you don't use Flesh to Stone spell against a creature that is in tune with the earth and stone, then this curse shouldn't really be a problem. But it does mean you have to be careful not to use the bracelet on the wrong person or risk instant death for your misuse of it. However, even if we don't count the curse, the item in general is just not very good simply due to the fact that it only has the charges that come with the bracelet rather than having charges that it can regain at dawn like so many other magic items have, which further restricts how and when you can want to use this item. Because of this, there's a very good chance that you waste the only 3 charges of Flesh to Stone you have on a single creature simply because they either got lucky with their saves or just have too high of a constitution score to even be affected, since DC 15 is such a low saving throw at this point of the game, which makes the Bracelet of Rock Magic pretty terrible overall. And at number 2, we have the Bag of Devouring, a very rare wondrous item that can be found in the Dungeons Master's Guide. It closely resembles the Bag of Holding, another magic item that's useful for carrying large amounts of stuff with you. But the Bag of Devouring is anything but that. In fact, the Bag of Devouring is actually a feeding orifice for a gigantic extra-dimensional creature. It fully consumes any plant or animal matter that's placed inside, making them unable to be retrieved ever again, while any inanimate objects placed inside the Bag of Devouring will be swallowed and spat out into a different plane of existence once per day. And any creature that dares to reach inside of the bag will have a coin flip's chance of being pulled inside of the bag, with the only way to get out is by using its action to try and make a successful DC 15 strength check to attempt an escape. And if that doesn't work, another creature can use their action to reach in and pull you out, but also get subjected to the 50-50 chance of being pulled in when doing so, and the DC for the strength check for pulling their friend out of the bag is 20 instead of 15. And if any creature starts its turn inside of the bag of Devouring, they are simply devoured, body destroyed, and unrecoverable. As a last resort, however, if you manage to pierce, tear, or otherwise destroy the bag of Devouring, everything inside is transported to a random location on the astral plane. This magic item can either be used to bait your party into thinking they have a bag of holding, when really, they've been carrying a bag of Devouring that's been taking and eating anything and everything, including important magic items that have been placed in there. Or alternatively, if your party knows they're in possession of a bag of Devouring, they can use the bag as bait or decoy for undesirable company, such as a group of bandits or guards. However, at the end of the day, this item serves very little purpose other than consuming important items or people. And if one of your party members gets pulled inside, it's very possible to cause an entire TPK if everyone gets unlucky on their strength pulls to pull their friends out. But while this magic item is a bit on the unfun side of things, since losing important items is never fun, it can still work as a bit of a plot device. For example, you might give your players a very powerful item early on and then trick them into placing it inside of a bag of Devouring they thought was a bag of holding, which could start a treasure hunt-like quest to recover the item after it's been spat out somewhere else. Having at least some use, even plot-related ones, is why Bag of Devouring takes number 2 spot on this list, since, if you can believe it, the next item is even worse. And the number 1 pick for this list is the Hammer of Runic Focus, which was introduced in the Book of Many Things. It's a warhammer that requires attunement and comes with 3 charges that restores at a rate of 1d3 per dawn. You may expend 1 charge as a bonus action and slam the hammer on the ground, creating a 15-foot radius circle of glowing runes centered on the point of impact for 1 minute, or until you either create a new circle or use your bonus action to dismiss it. While you're inside this rune, the hammer gains a +3 bonus to attack rolls and damage rolls made with the hammer. While the idea of the warhammer covered in runes is admittedly a cool concept, everything else about this weapon is just unnecessary. Requiring attunement for a weapon that doesn't do anything special, unless you use a bonus action to give yourself a +3, is probably the worst effect you can have on a very rare tier weapon, especially when you consider that weapons of this tier grant a +3 bonus to attack and damage rolls by default and don't require attunement and doesn't need any actions to give you these bonuses. And that's not to mention the fact that Hammer of Runic Focus requires you to expend charges that have an inconsistent recharge rate in order to activate in the first place. If the circle of runes affected your party members in some way by affecting their weapons too, then this item would actually be pretty good. But because this item has too many restrictions and limitations and is instantly power crept by just buying or making a +3 warhammer, a baseline weapon you can find in the DMG, the Hammer of Runic Focus is definitely the worst magic item on this list. Alright, and there you have it. Are there any magic items you feel would fit this list better? Are there some fun ways to use some of the items on this list that may not have been shown or talked about? Or do you have any topics for future videos just like this one? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.